Alundra is a very interesting game for me. I have fond memories of playing it, but I cannot remember a thing about it. So let's fire it up and have a look. The immediate thing that jumps out at me is the kicking rad anime 90s intro that it's got. Just listen to this. Now, obviously, I'm not going to play the full intro. This is a brief look at the game for, you know, a given quality of brief. So let's hit new game, fire it up, and see where we go. Our adventure starts out on a ship. It's a very nice looking ship. The graphics for this game are actually very, very pleasant. I also believe that they've aged pretty well. And to give you the Cliff Notes version of what happens on the ship, the captain tells us to go and take a nap. We go take a nap. We get one of our weird dreams. A man called Lars shows up, calls us the returner. He tells us of a place called Inoa, and that there is a lake to the north of it, and there is something very, very bad down there. He shows us a prophetic vision of the town itself. And then this chappie called Melzas turns up and says that he's going to stop us. We then awaken to the ship in a storm. We go outside to have a little bit of a look. The ship crashes, everybody dies, we wash up on the beach, and get taken to somebody's house. It's also worth noting that this is a working designs translation, so the dialogue is absolutely full of these delightful little moments like Jess calling himself an lonely old fat man. And now we receive control. We can jump, we can slash or pick things up, and we can dash. But most importantly right now, I'm just going to shut up for a bit and let you listen to the absolute banger that is the Inoa Village theme. As I heard those first few notes kick in, there was definitely something in my brain that triggered, and I could just hear the rest of it. It was like being transported back to, when, 1998? And being sat in the room with my friends and we're all just sitting playing Alundra. We have a quick nosy about the village and we eventually find the house of Wendell. Wendell is bedridden and appears to be plagued by nightmares. He seems to be having a particularly bad one. As we go in, we get a request to go and find Septimus, who can help. But unfortunately, Septimus has been a little bitch. He refuses to help, so we try to walk away, until Septimus notices the scar on our foreheads. Apparently this scar marks us as the Dreamwalker. Septimus then asks us to go to Tarn Manor to see if we can find any clues about stopping Wendell's nightmare from Septimus's old master. So while we make our way over to Tarn Manor, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the difficulty of the game. The manual states that they'd rebalanced the difficulty to make some bosses easier to kill, but what they'd actually done is that virtually every enemy in the game has been given higher HP and attack stats. There is one boss that was made easier, but even still that boss was given 50% extra health. There is a patch that restores enemy health to the original values, but we're playing this as working designs intended. So after a bit of a walk, we do actually make our way to Tarn Manor. As we walk in, Big Bad Melzas shows up. He locks all of the currently open doors, and also questions our mental faculties. Bit harsh. After some exploration, we'll find our way to the sewers, and we're introduced to one of the cornerstones of Alundra's design, puzzles. Take, for instance, this switch puzzle. If you activate the switches in the wrong order, the bridge opens and you can't get back to the stairs, so you obviously have to activate them in a certain order. It's not a complex puzzle, but it's nice to see puzzles where you can get things wrong. This may come back to haunt me later. We carry on through the sewers, solving a few more switch puzzles, and eventually we find a key. We open the locked door on the second floor, where we find the Book of Elna. That's the thing that Septimus wanted us to find, I presume. And we get another video call from Melzas, saying we'll pay the ultimate price for dabbling in his affairs. Cool. We make our way back to Wendell's house with the Book of Elna in tow, and are greeted by Septimus. Septimus reveals to us that we are from the clan of Elna, and have the power to enter dreams. Pretty convenient that we arrived here, really. We then enter Wendell's nightmare, which is something of a mini dungeon. The music here is definitely something. We see Wendell's managed to get himself surrounded by 5 gels, somehow, and then our adventure begins. This dungeon's just a lot of hidden switches to move blocks, but there are hidden pathways due to the perspective in these arches. After making our way around the nightmare, we are also ambushed by gels. However, we have a sword. After making quick work of the ambush, we get the other puzzle of the dungeon. If we take the wrong path, we get blocked off and can't continue, having to go back to the start and jump on the switch to reset the section. After making our way through, we have our boss fight. The gels combine to form the gelatinoid, and our fight begins. It's not a very exciting fight, I'm going to be honest. This thing has an absolutely massive amount of health for a first boss, and after you do enough damage, it splits into 4. Each of these will also split into 4 regular gels. Yeah, it's not great, but when they're all beaten, the fight's over. Wendell is finally released from his nightmare, and we also leave his head. The people celebrate as Wendell is fine now, and Septimus wants to discuss our powers. Outside, some chap named Giles mentions that you should tell Chancellor Ronan about this. Now, if I know anything about 90s RPGs, it's that religion is universally evil. And sure enough, as we head to Septimus's house, Giles tells us that Ronan has requested an audience, and well, look at this guy. If he's not evil, I'll eat my hat. We get a but thou must dialogue choice before we're free to head back to Septimus's house. Which we do. Septimus tells us of a few of the people in the village that have sleep issues, and as we go to leave, an earthquake hits. Except it's not an earthquake. The coal mine north of the town's collapsed. Sounds like we should investigate. Talking to some of the villagers outside, we find that the only non-survivor, Olin, has been taken to the mayor's house, so we head in and see that he's having a nightmare. After talking to the others in the room, Septimus arrives and tells us we know what to do. So we hop into Olin's head to find out what happened at the mine. In the mine, we find out how to activate their steam engine, left, left, right, left, and also that mining bombs are a thing. Curious. Olin uses his mining bomb to blast a new section of mine open, and the Merg attack. We can actually fight off the Merg here, and a treasure chest does drop, but Muggins here was too slow, and well, there goes the 100% run. It's that easy to miss something. Incredible. Unfortunately, despite our best efforts, Olin dies. We're then told that there's nothing we can do, so we should just go home. Jess appears to have been fired up by the current events, and he's made his own mining bomb, but he tells us that we're not allowed to take it until he tells us it's safe at the mine. Completely disregarding fake dad's instructions, we take this torso-sized bomb, shove it in our pack, and make our way to the mines. With bomb in bag, we make our way to the coal mine north of the town. We blast our way in, and are immediately met with an earthquake, which blocks off the passage. But we have bombs, so we just bomb that back open. The steam engine we saw earlier is offline, and the way to it is locked, so we explore where we can. Eventually we find Lyman, who is surrounded by Mergs. The Mergs notice us. A quick fight ensues and we go to check on Lyman. He gives us his key, then dies. Apparently, we're really bad at saving people. Heading back to the engine room, we use the sequence we saw in Olin's nightmare to activate it, and we can now ride minecarts. I brought this up in a different video, but games really need to go back to adding minecarts. They're fun. What follows now is a sequence of riding the cart, flicking a switch, riding the cart, flicking a switch. So I'll cut most of that out. But I also want to say that this is where one of Alundra's major flaws begins to rear its head. You see, as well as being a top-down action RPG, Alundra is a platformer, and while the perspective it has just doesn't work well for a platformer. Sometimes it looks like you can jump and reach something, but it's actually too high up. But you'll spend a while trying to figure out where to go next, and it turns out you actually can make that impossible looking jump to a ledge. I'll also add that this game doesn't have analog controls. At all. D-pad only, folks. So if you need to make an angled jump, good luck, have fun. Throughout our exploration of the mine, we do also find the other 2 miners, who are also both dead. At the end of the mine, we are introduced to Zazan, a large zombie-looking Merg. He mentions that Melzas is looking for crests, and that they already have 2. He then, zangiefs out of there like it's no one's business. We have a small tussle with some Mergs and find our way to their tree village, and hoo boy, that is a big village. We head back home for a nice rest, but are blocked from entering our house by Sierra. Sierra asks us to go see Sybil. Sybil, by the way, dreams while still awake. I'm not entirely sure how that works, but let's go see what she wants. At this point, I wandered around for about 20 minutes because I didn't know where Sybil's house was. I'm not the best at exploring or remembering where things are, so we're at Sybil's house. Sybil tells us she has prophetic dreams and wants to show us the dream that is currently plaguing her. Her dream shows us two things. Klein running around the town while some kind of beast roars before he himself turns into a monster, and the Merg entering a child's dreams. Having been nicely creeped out, we go back home. Sierra moves out of the way and we can go see our adopted father. Jess asks us to lay flowers on Olin's grave, but also to watch out for the monster that has been seen skulking around the graveyard. We do as Jess asks, and hear a voice calling to us. Following it, we reach a new dungeon, Lars's Crypt. Lars's Crypt immediately brought back a few memories from when I was young. The first memory was the first puzzle, the ghosts. The second memory was that I just never got past this puzzle. Yep, this is as far as I got whenever I tried to play Alundra back in the day. I think this first puzzle is actually a little notorious among people who've played the game, so I'll give a brief explanation. There are 5 saints. Each has a different colour, and each will give you a statement regarding their level of teaching. It's a little bit of a logic puzzle, as you have to take their statements and then talk to them in order of most important to least important. On this playthrough, it did take me a little while, but that's mainly because I was making notes. The rest of the crypt's puzzles are largely straightforward, but I'm going to bring up one puzzle specifically. The sign in the crypt informs you that 1 step forward, 2 steps back is the rule of a world turned black. Once with success, advance again. With persistence, you shall win. And I, in my infinite wisdom, only made note of the 1 step forward, 2 steps back part. You see, there's a looping set of rooms in the crypt. One has 3 orbs you have to hit in the right order. One has gels that must be killed. And by following the puzzle's instructions, you can progress through the rooms and carry on with the dungeon. Instead, I sat for a good half an hour wondering why it wasn't working with 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And every single time, I didn't even try going to the next room. Instead, I left and tried again. I hate myself sometimes. The dungeon ends with a boss fight against the Ancient Guardian. He's not too bad, but he does have more attacks than the Gelatinoid. After a bit of a battle, he goes down, and we get given Earth Magic and Lars's Crest. Nice! We go back to the town to see Fake Dad, who informs us that Bonaire and Nadia have both fallen ill. Nadia, by the way, seems to cause explosions when she sleeps. Definitely an interesting development, and if I had that kind of ability, then I think I'd have leveled about half of the United Kingdom by now. Nadia is hopelessly in love with Bonaire, although Bonaire is instead obsessed with somebody called Sarah. Quite concerning, honestly, as there's no one called Sarah in the town. We go to see Nadia, but she refuses to let us help her unless Bonaire is saved. So instead, we go to save Bonaire. A nice little touch I noticed while going between these houses is that there is a crow in both of them, probably signalling the fact that they have been cursed. I'll have to keep an eye out going forward to see if I spot more. We go see Bonaire, and sure enough, we hop in his noggin and into his nightmare. Entering Bonaire's nightmare, we are immediately adjusted to his paramour, Sarah. Working Design's lackadaisical approach to localizing starts to show a bit more here, with Bonaire being a generic 90s surfer dude, and Sarah being overly flirtatious. At one point, she even uses the phrase, "intertwine our taut, supple flesh forever." However, Bonaire also uses the phrase, "tasty morsel of babitude," so it's still quite fun. The nightmare itself isn't too complex, mostly consistent of hitting orbs to topple blocks on and off. That damned platforming perspective did get me stuck for a while though, as one of the jumps you have to make is this. Which to my eyes didn't look like the right direction, but apparently it was. The boss fight, on the other hand, did actually give me my first death. I'd been rather cavalier with my supply of healing items up until this point, and the boss managed to wear me down by constantly tricking me into thinking they were appearing, when instead it was my arch nemesis, Bullet. Coincidentally, this is the game over screen, and if I'd have thought ahead, I'd have just said I was trying to show it off for you, but alas, we retry, and this time the boss goes down nicely. Sarah insults us a bit, then, for our insolence, says she's going to steal the soul of the one who loves Bonaire. Yep, you guessed it. Nadia dies. But hey, we get this sweet iron flail immediately after. Score! We are informed that a tree blocking a bridge has been cleared, so we'll head over for a bit of a look. The Desert of Despair is now open to explore. I'm not sure exploring a place called the Desert of Despair is a good idea, but we do it anyway. The desert is a little bit annoying as it hampers your movement speed and your jump, but we do get the sand cape which lets us bury ourselves in the sand and move under obstacles. A quick side note here is that while I was exploring the desert, I found 2 separate corpses, both named Paul, and both holding a note telling us where to find the sand cape. So if you happen to be named Paul, I'd definitely advise not going anywhere called the Desert of Despair. You're welcome, Pauls. After a bit of platforming chicanery, we find ourselves warped to the ancient shrine, our next dungeon. Inside the shrine, a skeleton asks us if we seek the path of truth and salvation, then gives us our task. There are 4 statues in the shrine that we have to prove our worth to, so let's get to it. The shrine is covered in sand, so a lot of the time we can't run or jump very high. Great. The main type of puzzle in this shrine is throwing shapes onto specific platforms. A star, a moon, a sun, and a droplet. However, once you put the correct stone on the platform, you can't pick it up again. Which led me to a bit of trouble in the first of these puzzles that I found. You have to use these 2 stones from the left side to make stairs to get the 2 stones on the right side. So I had to reset the puzzle. I think this is one of Alundra's major downsides. It has a habit of going, haha, gotcha, when you make a mistake, and then you either have to backtrack out of the room to reset it, or the game will put you back a few rooms so you lose a few minutes getting back to where you were. And this only gets worse as time goes on, as we'll find out later. This puzzle was complete and utter nonsense. I don't even class it as a puzzle, it's just luck. You hit the switch and 2 barrels and 2 spike balls drop into the holes. You have to catch 2 barrels here, but the holes they drop down are random, and if you're wrong and it's a spike, you're taking damage. And if you take more than 5 tries, no more barrels drop. This is not fun and should not be in the game. There was also this puzzle where one of the stones is just hidden because of the perspective. Nice. When we eventually reach the boss, it's just the Guardian from Lars Crypt again. Straight up, nothing new. I think he even has the same health pool. But then we get to do the barrel catching again. Except this time, we need 3 barrels. And we only have 6 tries. I wish I was making this up. Finally, we get ambushed by 8 lizards as our final test, and honestly, this made me put the game down for a bit and just chill out. As we'll find out later, Alundra likes to just mob you with enemies from time to time to increase the difficulty, but this dungeon has been an absolute slog and my healing items are looking barren. After beating the final test, we get a shiny new sword, some boots that let us walk normally on the sand, and a live vessel. Thank Christ that's over. Returning to the village once more, we're told the tide has gone out. If you ask me, Alundra has definitely earned just a little bit of chill time, so we go to sunbathe for a bit. Except, no, we find this big cave on the beachfront. Balls. The coastal cave is our next dungeon, and for the most part, it's pretty straightforward, navigation-wise at least. Platforming, this happened a lot. Wait. I'm remembering now. Coastal Cave is actually an incredibly painful dungeon because of this section. What you need to do is break the pillars holding these balls so the balls fly off and block the gaps so you can jump across and get through. I must have been suppressing my memory a bit because I'm sat looking at 20 minutes of footage of me breaking a pillar, watching the ball fly off in the wrong direction, then leaving the room to reset it so I can have another go. This wouldn't be so bad if you only had to block 1 gap, but you don't. You have to block 2. And they have different timings for when to hit them and... This one didn't feel good. But I did it thinking it must be for some optional loot. Maybe a life vessel. So imagine my surprise when I got through and was rewarded with a key. This wasn't optional. My god. Thankfully, that was the only stumbling block of the dungeon, so we'll move on to the boss, the Watcher in the Water. I like this fight. Maybe that's only because it's not the Guardian again, but this chap actually has a few moves up his sleeve. He'll summon hands up from the water in certain configurations and they'll rush at you. Or he'll shoot bubbles at you. Or he'll summon a circle of hands that then spiral out. And you can only hit him when he's out of the water. A fun boss. Not too easy, not too hard. Well done. After defeating the Watcher, we're introduced to Vull, one of Lars's compatriots. Vull tells us that the Merg already have the crest from here, but they do give us a magic scroll for our trouble. Vull then teleports us out the cave, and we head, as ever, back to the town. Septimus tells us that someone new has arrived in the village, claiming to have the same powers as us, so we immediately head to find out more. We meet Mare, who says that dreaming is bad. There's an argument about how death isn't the end because it's inspiring people like Jess to create things. Mare also argues with Septimus about how ending the nightmares might put humanity in danger. While sleeping, we're ambushed by Klein, who appears to drop from the ceiling. Very strange. He flees, and we go off to follow him. Alundra and Septimus play a bit of hide-and-seek with Klein before deciding to sleep and enter his nightmare in the morning. I'm going to shut up for a bit and let you soak in the music that plays in Klein's nightmare. This nightmare is very different to the ones we've been in so far, as you can tell from the way that it looks. Also, everything has ice physics. Great. Thankfully, we can mostly negate them by jumping everywhere. Take that, developers. The aim of Klein's nightmare is to acquire 3 keys to open the room at the top. We have several staple puzzles in here. The forced movement arrow mazes, the block sliding puzzles, hidden switches while being timed. It's actually a super solid dungeon, except for one thing. Yes, I keep harping on about the perspective, but just look at this room. This actually hurt my brain to look at. After grabbing the 3 keys, we make our way up to the top and find Klein, but we're ambushed by the Soul Leech. This boss confuses the hell out of me. He has 2 attacks, spawning gels and sucking you in. This is a special fight in that you have to hit it 20 times with any weapon. He can only be hit while he's sucking you in, and hitting him twice during that will cause the suck to stop. If he sucks in Klein, nothing happens, thankfully. I kind of figured out a strat for this by standing to the side and constantly attacking, but this didn't always get me the 2 hits and I'd get sucked in. After the 20 hits, we get a message from Septimus saying that Klein is having a very bad time and we need to leave his nightmare. Klein then transforms into a monster in the real world, and we're forced to put him down. The villagers pay their respects, Maya talks about a great evil in control of the whole thing, and we go to sleep. You know what that means by now, right? We get ourselves a nice new bow. Armed with our bow, we can shoot an orb in the swamp to open the entrance to what I can only describe as a terribly designed dungeon. The reptile lair is very light on puzzles in the traditional sense, and more if you can read the developers' minds. First though, I'll explain the problem with the enemies in the dungeon. The normal lizard boys can't be hit unless they're in their own attack animation, which is fine in a 1-on-1 or a 2-on-1 situation, but as we'll see later, this is not a good thing in a mosh pit. There's also some ranged enemies who can not only snipe you from a distance, but can also hit you if they're on a different elevation to you. So most of the sections in this dungeon will pit you against, at minimum, 4 of these enemies. That's not too bad if you do it once or twice, but this dungeon is basically just that, repeated over and over again while you slowly run out of healing items. But then you reach this room. So far, any time an enemy has come out of a statue, you just had to kill the enemy. But not here. You see, if you kill a lizard man and his statue is still there, he'll just pop right the hell back out of it. My first time in this room, I thought that maybe I had to kill a certain amount of them and they'd stop spawning. But no, you have to hit each statue 4 times, while the actual enemies are still attacking you too. Suffice to say, this is where my first run of this dungeon ended. I died. And then, because I'm an absolute idiot, it turned out that the last time I'd saved was about halfway through Klein's dream. I couldn't believe it. I'd lost about an hour of play, but I was determined to complete this game for the video, so I replayed and got back to where I was. The rest of the dungeon continues to up the enemy count per room, usually with a decreasing amount of space in each consecutive fight. Honestly, if this had been earlier on in the game, I'd have just quit. This was an absolutely miserable dungeon. It is kind of redeemed, however, by the name of the boss, Reptilicus Maximus. But then the fight starts and, oh look, infinitely respawning lizard men. Great. The boss itself just jumps around and will try to heal if it's on low health, but the major danger is those goddamn lizard men. Who thought this was okay? I hope this is as low as Alundra gets. After killing Maximus, we meet Geel, another of Lars's pals. Geel actually did his job and managed to keep his crest, which he gives to us, along with fire magic. Heading back to the town, we're met by Jess, who tells us Giles has succumbed to the nightmare, and that the townspeople have gone to Magiskar to pray. Magiskar, as it turns out, appears to be these people's equivalent of heaven. All things begin and end in Magiskar. So it's pretty damn convenient that it's located about 50 foot from the town. Giles had been trying to tell the town that we're responsible for everything that's going on, but we are a benevolent saviour and won't hold it against him. So in we hop to Giles's nightmare. I don't know whether I was just in a bad mood after the reptile lair, but this place was worse. Far worse. The first puzzle you come across is this room. You kill the gel, the vase falls, and it moves along the arrows. It looks like you need to jump to that platform with the switch, right? You are correct, but what you're not seeing, and what I didn't see for a long time, is that actually there's another walkable road down at the bottom hidden by that wall. And guess what? There's no arrows there. I was furious. That's just not fair at all. There's nothing even hinting that there's a walkable space down there. There's a couple other points that exist literally just to waste your time. There are 2 points in the dungeon where you have to drop down a hole and land on a ledge. But you can't react and land on it, you'll be too late. No, you have to be holding the direction of the ledge as you transition between screens. So the first time you jump down, you'll miss and have about 3 minutes of backtracking to do to get back to where you were. And God forbid you miss any of those jumps, because down you go again. They do score a couple of points for having a very traditional lights out puzzle in here. I'm not the best at them, but I can solve them with enough time. At the end of the dungeon, we have a refight with the Soul Leech, except this time if Giles gets sucked in, you lose, and that's that. Which is immediately what happened to me. I shut the game off and went to bed for the night. Having slept on it a bit, I came back for a few more tries and eventually figured out a very silly strat. If I ran into Giles, he wouldn't move during the suck, and neither would I. And if I pulled out a bomb as I was jumping, I wouldn't lose any footing, but the boss would suck the bomb towards him. I feel no remorse that I cheesed the hell out of this boss, because this dungeon sucks. Coming out of the nightmare, Giles is now completely okay, and very, very sorry for telling people that we were the cause of everything. The mayor asks us to inform the townspeople that Giles is fine. So hi-ho, it's off to Magiskar we go. At Magiskar, everyone seems happy that Giles is alright, and they return home. Jess warns us about a crack at the back of the room, so naturally, we go over and bonk it with our flail. Magiskar introduces us to 2 new mechanics. These neat little platforms that move in the direction that we walk in, and fire. Yes, fire, burning things down. After those last 2 dungeons, Magiskar was almost a breath of fresh air, but this is still Alundra, so there were definitely some teething problems. Take for example this room. We've seen these enemies plenty of times before, and know they breathe fire, and we've been using fire to burn down these vines. So we can infer that we can use these enemies to burn down the vines and get to that switch. The trouble is that these enemies are slow, and I couldn't figure out a reliable way to bait them over, so I just kinda stood nearby the switch and waited for a while. There's also a really nice but infuriating touch with these flames. In some rooms, water drips from the ceiling, and if that hits your flame, it's snuff. I really enjoyed this room. Figuring out the order to use the torches and which vines to burn to reach the switch was great, and didn't feel like the game actively wanted me to fail. It did feel like the game hated me though, since landing on a flame not only does damage to you, but breaks the flame, and that means traipsing back up to the top of the room, leaving and coming back in. This room really highlights the "no, you didn't solve the puzzle, go back to the start" aspect of Alundra for me. You have to light the 4 torches at the 4 corners of the room by grabbing one of the flames from the middle and jumping over to each one. But if you light 3 and mess up the 4th, out you go and you start over at the beginning. It really feels like someone just needed to sit down with the designers and go, they've done it once, just let them have it when it comes to puzzles like this. Then there's this final puzzle that combines all the aspects that we've seen so far, the moving platforms, things shooting at you, flames and vines, but this feels like an earned challenge. It's right at the end. I appreciated what they did here, building up the mechanics and then throwing them all at you at once. And then we move on to the Magiskar boss, the Corpse Worm. This is another simple fight. You have to break the armor on its segments by hitting them, and then smack the worm in the face. It's slightly complicated by the sacks that it spawns that in turn spawn little bees, and also that he can regenerate his shell, forcing you to break it again, but it was definitely nice to have something straightforward after the questionable fight that was the Soul Leech. This was also quite a long fight for me, clocking in about 5 minutes, but I was also being careful because I couldn't remember when I'd saved last. At some point I'll have to break my habit of not saving at every opportunity. After beating the worm, we're greeted by Uma, the Queen of Life and Death, and also Lars's pal. Apparently the corpse worm was her servant, but after her crest was stolen, this is really getting silly guys, just protect your crests, it went berserk. Uma gives us the wind scroll for our efforts and sends us on our way. We awaken back home and Septimus runs in and... I'm going to go ahead now and put a spoiler warning out. If you have any interest in playing Alundra for yourself and want to experience the story mostly blind, turn off the video. We're at the midish point now and I think things are probably going to start happening. Anyway, Septimus tells us that Ronan has been praying to a dark force and not an actual god. Surprise, surprise. We head off to the sanctuary to go see Ronan. Hopping outside our house, Sybil approaches with a new dream to show us. The dream shows us walking through somewhere we haven't seen before, Lutus telling us that Jess has to make a new sword, and Jess making us the holy sword after Lutus has died, and finally, a proper look at Melzas himself. Sybil gives us a bit of encouragement, and we make a quick stop first to see Maya, who reiterates that the god Ronan was worshipping is actually evil. Heading to the sanctuary, we find it locked, and Septimus encourages us to do a bit of breaking and entering. Always a fun time breaking into a church. The sanctuary is a fun little section which is reminiscent of a scavenger hunt. The downside is that it's linear and you have to hit certain triggers in order to progress. So unless you know exactly what you're doing, you can expect to spend a little bit of time here just wandering around looking for the next trigger. None of the puzzles are particularly difficult or interesting. We just get to see Septimus finally doing something to help out our cause, which is nice. Eventually, we stand face to face with Ronan in front of a statue of Melzas. Ronan tells us that most of the townsfolk actually know what Ronan has been doing. After a bit of back and forth, we leave, finally knowing that Ronan is indeed a bad lad. After his sleep, we hear the familiar sounds of Jess making us a new item. We get the power glove, but it feels like something's missing. Doesn't someone have to die before we get an item? Septimus enters and tells us that, indeed, Sybil is dead. But this wasn't from a nightmare. This was murder. Oh dear. We head to the cemetery to pay our respects, and as we leave, Septimus asks us to go into Maya's dream, as he has something to ask her and doesn't want to wait. Hopefully, this will answer whether Maya is a friend or a foe. So in we go to Maya's dream, and I really, really like this dungeon. There's no combat, just puzzles, and other than one, they're all good, because obviously I have to find something negative to say about everything, right? I am British, after all. Maya's dream is this delightful garden, and it has the chillest of beats playing to really enhance the dreamlike state of the game. Maya's dream is a dungeon of two halves, interlaced with each other. The first half is playing hide and seek with a young Maya, and the second half is a puzzle room after we catch Maya each time. There are 7 rooms in total, and at the end of each room we get a glimpse into Maya's past. We find out that Maya's mother turned heavily to religion after her husband died, to the point of obsession. After learning these secrets of the gods, Maya's mother was burned at the stake. Whoever was responsible for this also tried to kill Maya, but she escaped. Eventually, Maya discovers that she has the power to dreamwalk, learning that the god her mother worshipped was actually a demon. Finally, we see Maya arriving at Inoa, knowing that this is her chance to destroy the demon that had ruined her life, Melzas. Waking up from the dream, we're told that the rocks stopping the old watermill from running have moved and we can go there. But first, we have a couple of things to pick up on the side. First, we go to visit Nava, who gives us a spring bean. He also tells us about Nerud, the giant guardian. He mentions that Nerud would be eager to help us as he opposes Melzas. This guy seems to know more than he's letting on. But before heading to the waterway and on to Nerud, we take a little trip to the Fire Manor to solve a few puzzles and snag an important item. The first puzzle is to light these torches with the fireball moving around the room. It does bounce very oddly at times, but you can hit it with something to change its direction. This took me a while. I have no idea how this next puzzle works, but I got it solved pretty quick. Maybe the fire follows the direction you move in? I'm not sure. Finally, we just have to follow the path the fire takes across the symbols. Upon doing this, we're rewarded with the Flame Wand. We can now burn down vines at will, and regular enemies cannot block attacks from it, so I really could have used this in the damn reptile layer, but hey ho. We have one more stop before heading to the waterway, and it is The Ice Manor, or as I like to call it, I spent 2 hours here solving 2 block sliding puzzles because I'm an idiot. Yeah, this mini dungeon has 2 block sliding puzzles and that's it, but they're pretty difficult. Obviously I'm not going to show the 2 whole hours of this, but suffice to say that it involved a lot of paper and drawing out what I thought were solutions until I eventually got one that worked. For this monumental task, we're rewarded with the Ice Wand. I haven't found any specific use for ice yet, but I'm sure there'll be one at some point, so I'm glad I got this now. Arriving at the waterway, we use our spring beans from Nava to hop up to what I would say is the worst platforming challenge in the game so far. At the end of this tunnel, there's a life vessel. To get it, you have to make 5 consecutive timed jumps in a row, and if you fall, you're back at the start of the dungeon, meaning you have to put the beans in the pots and jump again. This is just shameful time wasting, particularly when you fail these jumps about 15 times and have to ascend again every time, but it's not like that happened to me or anything, no, honest. We get introduced to Nerude's worshippers in this dungeon, and I think they're kind of adorable with their little picks, but we cut them down and exit the waterway to Nerude's lair. Nerude's lair isn't a complicated dungeon, and it's also pretty fun. We have quite a few interactions with the incompetent worshippers, which adds some nice flavour. I'd say it's more of a combat-focused dungeon than a puzzle dungeon too, but we actually have the tools to deal with the things thrown at us now, so it's actually fun. Unlike the reptile lair, screw you reptile lair. It was this section that stumped me for a little while. One of the worshippers hits a switch and causes infinitely spawning mudmen to fall from the ceiling. I didn't think they'd spawn infinitely, so I spent about 5 minutes killing scores of them. It turns out the solution is to leave the room and re-end it. This time, the worshipper hits the wrong switch and spawns some stairs up to where they are instead. This one kinda felt bad, but it's also on me for not trying to leave and come back, I guess. I also struggled with destroying this head using the fire wand. Then I remembered that bows exist, and it went down pretty easily. It did eat through most of my healing items though, so mission accomplished, I guess. This dungeon also had a very rough mini-boss fight against these 7 heads. The outer heads shoot fireballs that will turn to move towards the player. The middle head shoots a massive laser that definitely stings and you don't want to get hit by it. The rub here is that you can only destroy the heads in a specific order, which you can figure out by whacking them and seeing if they take a hit. Each head takes 15 hits from anything to die, so you can just stand back and pepper them with arrows if you don't want to get in the mix. Reaching the top of the dungeon, we meet Nerude, this large disembodied head. He decides to give us a trial to see if we truly are an ally. I suppose this is the boss fight of the dungeon, but it's not really a fight, nor is it hard. You run down the bridge and break the rocks that are in your way. Do this for long enough and you win. I'm not sure how this shows we're an ally of Nerude, but he seems to trust us after he decimates most of the bridge with his torso. That's gotta hurt. Nerude reveals he's one of the 7 guardians and that he is ecstatic that Nava has decided to fight against Melzas. I knew that fella was keeping secrets. Sadly, one of Melzas' lieutenants, Zorgia, swoops in and kills Nerude. Before he fades away, Nerude gives us his crest and tells his worshippers that we're a good person and should have their support. He teleports us away, then fades from existence. Miming, the leader of the worshippers, gives us the Aqua Cape and wishes us luck. The last worshipper also feels bad for trying to kill us and gives us 50 gilder. Cha-ching! Since we have the Aqua Cloak now, we might as well get its one use out of the way and we head to the Fairy Pond. This is an optional dungeon and it's also miserable. You see, most of the Fairy Pond is underwater, which means we now have super floaty high jumps. But several points of progression in this dungeon require very specific blind jumps to pass. And if you miss the jump, you get to painfully watch Alundra sink for a few seconds before falling off the screen. Delightful. The only real type of puzzle in this dungeon is, can you figure out where we want you to go? Which isn't fun. But our reward for clearing out this place is the Fiend Sword, a sizable upgrade to our sword from the Guardian's tomb. We do, however, get some interesting lore from Stenia, Queen of the Waters. She explains that there used to be many gods worshipped by humans, but they were greedy and fought each other for the power. Nerude was the only one of the Gazek, the giants, who chose not to fight. And long after the fighting had stopped, Nerude was no longer a god. Humanity had lost its faith in the Gazek. In their place, Melzas was created. Melzas used fear to gain the faith of the humans. Feeling threatened, Melzas began to kill whoever could oppose him. Melzas then attacks the fairy pond, and we leave. The pond closes forever. In town, we take a quick visit to Lutus, who tells us that Ronan has saved his life several times. We know that Lutus dying leads to the Holy Sword being forged, But how does Ronan know that? Maya tells us that since Ronan made us pray to Melzas, Melzas saw Sybil's dream through us. We decide to go and face off with Ronan once again. Ronan, smarmy as ever, figures out we want to destroy the statue and refuses to take us to it. He threatens us and we leave. We return home and check in with Jess before heading to bed for the night. Jess checks in on us, then leaves to go somewhere. In the morning, Maya runs in to tell us that Jess has been murdered. We rush to the graveyard and the burial service begins. Taking things slightly out of order for now, Jess had left us a note which I'll read while the burial service plays out. Alundra, if you are reading this, I must have expired. Oi, this is not good, you know what I'm saying? I went to see what Ronan was doing at the graveyard while you were sleeping. I know you are suspicious of him, and so was I. But I did not want you to take him on alone. I am very scared, Alundra. My hand quivers as I write. I must resist the urge to crumple this note and throw it away. It would be so easy to forget about Ronan, walk upstairs, and retire. But I cannot do that, my boy. I consider you my son, and I do not want you to be ashamed of me. So I've summed up all the courage I have remaining to write this letter, before I go to Ronan. Alundra, after my wife and son died, I was a broken man. Your iron will and light demeanour have fixed me. I did not know you for long, but I am glad that I did. Thank you, Alundra, my dear son. Love, Jess. After the service, Ronan blames us directly for Jess's death. That bastard. He'll pay for what he did. In the morning, Gustav tells us his daughter, Aline, has been stricken with the curse and begs us to help. We head over to Gustav's house to check on Aline. This is the first time we've actually spoken to Aline this playthrough, and we're warned that Aline has multiple personalities and that her nightmare is going to be different. Maya insists on coming along this time. We'll be thankful she wants to, believe me. I hear she gives good No, that was cut from the Working Designs localization, and I'm not puerile enough to repeat that joke here. So the gimmick here is that there's actually 4 different types of dungeons mashed into one, each containing one of Aline's personalities. We have fire, ice, water, and desert. Before getting into that though, let's just appreciate Alundra stepping on Maya in order to open a switch. Wow. This room is what I'd call the hub of the dungeon. The crystal in the middle will cycle through colours, and when we break it, the corresponding colour on the outside will break, and we can use the teleporter entering one of the 4 sub-areas. Honestly, I didn't know what order was best, so I just closed my eyes and hit the crystal. And surprise surprise, we get the ice area first. The downside to this dungeon, despite the thematic creativity really fitting, is that these are all just puzzle types that we've seen before. The ice area has sliding puzzles, the fire area is mainly switches and platforming, although there was this nice little puzzle where we need to turn off some lava spouts by blocking certain holes with rocks. It's not a difficult solve since you just block the 4 larger holes, but it's something a bit different and I like that. The water area is also more switches and platforming, but with the annoyance turned up massively because of perspective and having to slowly swim out of the room if you mess up. It's also pretty difficult to get up these steps in a hurry, so that wasn't overly fun because these big spike balls hurt. The water area also has this weird timing puzzle with Maya where we're supposed to jump on the switches at the same time, but she doesn't even have the decency to wait until Alundra is on the same platform as her to start. Thanks, Maya. I know we used your head as a stepping stone, but you could just give us a few seconds to get on the platform. Jeez. I'm not entirely sure what they were going for in the desert area, other than some naff gotcha moments. There are invisible holes in some of the sand that will drop you down and cost you some time, but other than that, this area is just kill enemy, move on. What I've neglected to mention so far is that at the end of the first 3 areas you finish, you fight the same boss each time. And it's basically just the gelatinoid, the first boss, with an extra gimmick. The eye that you can see at the top of its body. If you hit the body, the eye will lower. And if you hit it enough times in rapid succession, you can hit the eye itself. That's it. That's the whole fight. Oh, and at the end of the 3rd area, you'll fight 2 of them at once. Slightly lazy, but if it's good enough for Elden Ring, it's good enough for Alundra. At the end of the 4th area, her remaining personality basically tells us she's staying forever and to leave. So we do. Aline is saved, and Gustav promises to start being an actual parent. He then gives us the steel flail, which is 100% useless at this point as the flail we have breaks blocks fine, and the fiend sword we have does way more damage. We go to sleep, but are awoken by Keisha, who says Giles has fallen into another nightmare. We are about to go into his nightmare when Maya stops us. She thinks Melzas is setting us up this time. He's waiting for Alundra to enter Giles's dream, and then he'll kill Giles, which would effectively kill Alundra. Sneaky bastard. Some Merg enter the village, but we make very quick work of them and head back. Seems there's nothing we can do, and Giles transforms into a monster. Using the last of his remaining willpower, Giles fights the transformation and dies a human rather than a monster. Visiting Maya the next morning, she's found a gem on one of the Merg we killed and gives it to us. Suggesting that we acquire the fire wand before we head to the Merg woods, she sends us on our way. But we were clever and already have the fire wand. So it's time to take the fight to the Merg once and for all. The Merg woods themselves aren't overly interesting, I'm afraid. I'd actually say there was only 3 moments of note, and they are as follows. 1. You're supposed to push this stone with your flail by jumping and attacking, but does that honestly look possible from where we are down below? There was a similar puzzle in Giles's Nightmare, but at least that one had the stones off to the left and the right, and not at whatever angle this was supposed to be. 2. This cool little puzzle where you have to clear the room of enemies, but one is segregated in a little fenced area on a ledge, and you can kill it with a pot. I'd just like that killing something with a pot was a solution, if I'm being honest. And 3. The boss was just the stone golem again. No changes. We exit the woods into the village and are captured by the Merg and thrown into a cell. Welcome to the Great Tree. We have a neighbour in the cell over who is a keysmith. How do we know this? He's called Keysmith. I wonder if he'll be important in the dungeon at all. Anyway, to get out of our cell, you have to bomb that weird looking area at the back. I'm not sure what it's supposed to be, nor am I sure why a bomb works, but I'll go along with it. Being the Merg village we were shown when we came out of the coal mine back at the start of the game, this dungeon is exactly the size that you'd think it would be. Too big. And the music slowly drove me insane over the 45-ish minutes I was here. I did, though, spend a little while trying to hit this switch to free the keysmith, when the actual course of action was just to walk up to his cell. So that's something. Sure enough, Keysmith the keysmith opens a locked door for us. Actually on a couple of occasions. He also fixes a key when our ham hands bend it in a lock. No, I'm not kidding, we break a key in this dungeon by trying too hard to turn it. The puzzles for this dungeon are very straightforward, and I'd say the difficulty definitely came more from getting lost than being stumped. Stumped. Get it. When we reach the top of the tree, we get a showdown with the helicopter Merg himself, Zazan. He pretty much just did his double-fisted twirl to attack this entire fight, so he dropped pretty easily. We snag up the 2 crests that the Merg had claimed for Melzas and go back to town, where a fella named Yuri tells us that Mount Taller is erupting. Sounds like we have our next port of call. Now I have a bit of a bone to pick with getting to the Mount Taller dungeon. If you don't approach these stones from the right spot, they won't rise and you can't get to the entrance. Why? Why did they do this? I thought I'd gone to the wrong section, so I headed back to town, then went back to the same section to see if I'd missed a trigger or something. 3 times. But no, you just have to do this jump and approach from the south, and sure enough, the stones rise and we can go in. You need the ice wand before you can come to Tola, by the way, and if that wasn't enough, you actually need to cool these pillars before you can smash them, so you'd be knacked even if you could get in. Why do you need to cool them first? I have no idea, but they were red and glowing and that means hot, and the opposite of that is cold. Logic, ladies and gentlemen. I grabbed this life vessel early because if you seize a chest, you get the chest, right? Even if it's in the middle of lava. The item we get from this dungeon would actually let us walk on lava without taking damage, but I didn't realise, and also didn't want to wait. Puzzle-wise, this had some pretty awful things, like this room where you have to freeze the fireballs in midair to form a bridge, but there's a slight delay between attacking with the wand and the ice actually shooting out. Plus these fireballs move pretty damn fast, so it was just tedious trying to get them all lined up nicely. Because you aren't just going straight. You're going ever so slightly up. And believe me, you can absolutely get to the end and not have enough height. And because once wasn't enough, you have to do it twice. And this time you have to get some serious height. So I just stood on the middle 2 and alternated going slightly higher until I reached the required height. Take that, puzzle maker. Although in hindsight, that was probably the actual solution. This section, however, I really enjoyed. The statue tells us that we have to light the 7 torches in this area, but whenever you light a torch, a door closes. So you have to figure out a path through the chambers where you can light all the torches and not block yourself off. This was, as they say, a good puzzle. I also thought these puzzles were fun. You just have to slide the blocks around so you can light the torches, but this kind of thing for me is good puzzle design. There's no perspective tricks. There's no tight platforming. Just you, the room, and the brain. And then we reach the boss, Wilder the Dragon, one of the 7 guardians. They want us to prove that we have what it takes by fighting them. And honestly, it's a pretty decent fight. It's maybe a tad slow, but their attacks are well telegraphed. They hurt if they mess you up. And honestly, who doesn't love fighting a dragon? One thing of note is that you can only hurt Wilder with the ice wand, because fire dragon, right? Wilder does have this one slightly annoying attack, though. They'll make rocks fall from the ceiling, causing the room to shake. Or they'll make the room shake and cause rocks to fall, I don't know. Anyway, that'll make Alundra move erratically for a little bit, so you might get sniped by a fireball. The game did get a chuckle out of me by replacing the usual victory message with "Put Wilder on ice," which means I don't have to make an ice pun here after all. Cool. Wilder acknowledges that humans are finally ready to face Melzas, gives us its crest, and explodes. We are rudely awoken by Mare, who tells us that Burgess, one of the children in the village, has been kidnapped by the Merg. It feels like Alundra hasn't had a good night's sleep in a long time. We head over to Wendell's to get a better idea of what's going on. At Wendell's, it seems like Nestus, the other child, is having a bad nightmare. So Septimus comes in with a theory that I'm not sure quite holds up. He posits that the twins frequently have the same dreams. So if Alundra enters the dream of one child and crosses it, he should be able to exit the dream of the other child. Now personally, this feels like a flimsy justification for an extra dungeon since we're reaching the end of the game, but honestly there's some cool mechanics in this one, so I'll let it slide. We enter Nestus's noodle, and Mare tells us that Nestus and Burgess are connected but complete opposites, which should clue you into this dungeon's gimmick. What if I showed you this series of switches? Figured it out yet? Those teleporters switch us between whose dream we're in. So if you see the solution in this side of the dream, what do you think the solution is on the other side? It's the same pattern, but flipped on the horizontal axis. I just thought this was pretty neat, to be honest, and the whole dungeon is full of stuff like this. The downside is my short-term memory is a joke, so it did take me a little while to get through this one, with some very hastily scribbled notes. As we explore, we come across these glass-tiled floors which denote the 3 major progression points of this dungeon. The puzzles are all simple enough, just replicate what you see on one side of the mirror on the side that you're on. So here you have to position yourself so the barrel lands on both switches. Here you have to step on the switches in the order that the flames lit up, but flipped horizontally. And here we have this nice little fireball that follows our movements, so we have to light the torches in the flipped order that they were lit. Again, simple puzzles, but thematically very strong, and you don't really have to deal with any jank. Good times. Solving each of these mirror puzzles takes us to a switch that moves one of the statues from the start to its mirrored version. I imagine this is representing the anchor point that Alundra entered the dream at, so if you can move the anchor point, you can leave the other child's dream? I don't know, I'm not Septimus. This dungeon does have a boss fight. It's against the Twin Terrors. Although, I'll be honest, I didn't really see the twin aspect of this fight, as I spent most of it following one of them up and down the wall while smacking it with a sword. But rest assured, there are 2 of them, they do mirror each other's attacks, and they share a health pool. But it's an easy fight. We pop out of Burgess's head and we're back at the Great Tree. Of course, Sybil showed us this. The Merg were planning to use this dream bridge to invade the town. But we got there first and stopped them. Awesome, right? No, not awesome. Inoa is burning. Bonaire, dead. Myra, dead. Aline, dead. Whoever did this is going to pay. And I think we all know who is responsible. And that's not just because we had to kill a bunch of Merg outside in the village. The mayor asks us if we can have a strategy meeting about what to do next with the remaining villagers, and, well, there's not many left. When we arrived here, Inoa was bustling with life, and now there's not even enough people to fill a room. Alundra is a dark game, for sure. We have a quick chat with each of the villagers, each one devastated, scared, and feeling hopeless. Beaumont calls the meeting and a plan resolves to create a singular, powerful thought. Yeah, sure, it's a tropey idea now, but for 1997, that's pretty fun. Ronan enters, insults everyone for daring to oppose the gods, and damns everyone. Mayor finally explains the full story of what Melzas is actually doing. After the king had ordered all statues and idols to be burned, people stopped worshipping Melzas. Feeling his power leave him, Melzas became afraid. What if the people prayed to a new god and replaced him? All it takes is enough belief to manifest a god, so he had to make sure that people only prayed to him. I do think this is an interesting aspect of Alundra's story, that the only reason any of these gods have power at all is because the people gave it to them. There's some interesting real-world parallels there that I'm definitely not controversial enough to discuss. You know what I mean? Septimus theorizes that if all the people were to combine their thoughts, then Melzas might finally be able to be defeated. And with that, it's finally time to put an end to Ronin. For real this time. We head to the sanctuary and square up. Ronin laments that he didn't kill us when he had the chance and offers up his body to Melzas to become a vessel to kill us. Ain't that a face only a mother could love? The fight itself is either incredibly easy if you use one strat, or pretty rough if you don't. He conjures up this rotating spike ball shield that will regenerate if you destroy it. He also throws this shield at you if you're too far away. He'll fire these sky lasers at you, which have some slight homing. And finally, his left arm has become a giant laser cannon. Why can we not have a giant laser cannon? Now I tried fighting this guy with my sword, and holy Christ, it's not an easy fight. The spike shield will whittle away at your health whenever you go in for a hit, and you'll be going in for many, many hits, because this is the first boss that uses some kind of special health modifier. These last few bosses all have some kind of special HP value. Ronin will take 48 hits from pretty much any weapon in the game to kill, barring one weapon that we won't be getting because you have to die and retry 16 times just to unlock it. Every weapon will do 1 damage. There are a couple of things you can do to slightly mitigate this. If you picked up Olga's ring from the Gilded Falcons collection quest, then you can do 2 damage with some charge attacks. So this first attempt ended in me dying. Whoops. The next time though, I pulled out my bow and just wailed on him with charge attacks, which, importantly, pierced the spike shield and hit the boss. Ronin's also immune to damage while charging those aerial shots, so yeah, this is a pretty long fight. But if you use the bow strat, there's no danger of dying. It was basically 8 minutes of this. Remember back at the start when I said working designs had upped the enemy health by at least 50% for most things? It really starts showing now. With Ronin finally dead, the remaining village folk move into the sanctuary to hopefully protect themselves from any further Merg attacks. A nice touch here is that the Melzas statue has finally been destroyed. They decide to try and support Alundra by all dreaming of the same thing, Alundra, and giving him power. They also somehow managed to dream the Holy Sword into existence, and honestly the game kinda lost me on the explanation of how this works, but I'll take a new weapon and I'll move on. We still have one crest to find, so we leave the sanctuary in search of it. Maya comes out to tell us that she's worried Melzas is too powerful, and in typical heroic fiction fashion tells Alundra that he better not die and runs off back into the sanctuary. Cephas, the hunchback guy who's always been skulking around the graveyard, comes to tell us that he and Nava, the Spring Bean Man, are not humans but are instead Zolist. Aging much slower than humans, Nava is actually the 7th Guardian. Well, if we're looking for the final crest. Inside Nava's hut, we find that he's not blocking the path that he usually is, so we go down into Nava's keep. This is my least favourite type of dungeon, an endlessly looping maze. From the first room of the maze, each room leads to 3 other rooms, and we need to first find the final room, interact with the door, and be told we need to activate the 12 orbs in every other room before the exit will open. Cue 30 minutes of me walking around trying to figure out what goes where and where I have and haven't been. There's no puzzles in here really, the whole dungeon is the puzzle, and if you don't map it out then... Actually, knowing how bad I am at these kinds of things, you'll probably be fine. But I needed a sheet of paper and some willpower to light all of the orbs and get out of here. After leaving the keep, we get to what I can only assume is Nava's tropical island vacation home, and we go inside. But not before grabbing that chest over there, containing the Earth Book, and upgrade to our Earth Scroll. Obviously I've left a lot of this kind of thing off screen, but I'm just showing this to show that I am actually picking up things. I'm not doing a low percent run or anything. We go into Nava's holiday home and find him injured on the floor. We now find out who Melzas really is. An invader from another star. The king was supposed to have put an end to Melzas, but instead enslaved him to try and control or use his powers. But after being shown a horrific vision, the king outlawed worship of Melzas, destroying his statues and sinking the lake shrine. The lake was then sealed and bound by the 7 crests that we've been looking for. Looks like we're finally ready to take the fight to Melzas himself, as Nava has given us the final crest, but Zorgia swoops in. Remember Zorgia? The champ from Nerud's lair. He's really underused, come to think of it. He acts as if he's Alundra's nemesis, but this is only the 2nd time we've seen him. Anyway, we get to fight Zorgia in a very annoying fight. He can't be hit while he's in the air. He'll fake you out by landing, then immediately taking flight. But most annoying are these little discs he summons. They don't expire. They'll only disappear after hitting a wall. so you can reach a point where there's 5 of them flying around at you. I decided to just soak hits from them to make them hit walls, I'll be honest. Zorgia also casts some pretty big range area of effect spells, but if you hit him quick enough after he lands, he can't actually get the spell off. Zorgia also has the special HP rules, but this time takes a total of 90 normal hits, so strap in, this is one long fight. Afterwards, Nava dies and assumes his guardian form, I guess. The same thing that Lars and Vulankor use. He uses his power to send us back home to prepare for our final test. With 7 crests in hand, we head to the lake and slot them in place in these diocese? These stones, and the shrine rises from the lake. It's a suitably epic looking place for a final dungeon in my opinion. The main gate to the shrine is closed, so we have to get that open before the dungeon can begin properly. The lake shrine itself is long enough that it could be considered 2 dungeons, honestly. Now I like this dungeon. I think the atmosphere is good, the thematics of the puzzles in the second half are very good, the music of the second half is good, but you'll have noticed for a lot of the dungeons I've discussed an overarching puzzle type that the dungeon has. The Lake Shrine's general type of puzzle is switches. And sure, there's some variety. Some switches you have to press in the right order. Some you have to platform on in the right order. Some you'll have to activate and have no real clue what they've done, but it all does, unfortunately, boil down to just hitting switches. And then you get the occasional bit like this, where you have to shoot an arrow to hit the thing at the very top of the screen, but those stupid heads are pretty fast moving, so it's just a case of closing your eyes and tapping the fire button at varying intervals until you find the right exact frame to fire on. Anyway, our objective here is to make our way to the chains on both sides of the gate, hit them a few times, and jump on the switch to lower the gate. Once lowered, we get to the garden, which is actually just a maze. Check out those sweet T-Rex statues though. Say what you want about Melzas, dude has some style. One thing of note here is that we actually unlock a teleporter back to Inoa. It takes us to the bottom of one of the wells, but this is our only way to save throughout the whole dungeon. And if there's one thing that Alundra has taught me, it's to bloody save. So I saved now, and I saved after finishing the back half of the dungeon but before fighting the final bosses. The second half actually starts off meeting Melzas, who freezes the castle in time. I'll let a bit of this play out and be quiet so you can enjoy the music here, but it actually feels suitably climactic. We have 2 goals now. Unfreeze time and snuff the braziers. We actually use a bow to solve a few of the puzzles in here. Amazing. And this puzzle needed bombs to solve. Well, the vast majority of the dungeon is switch puzzles. The back half has a lot of nice little solutions like this. We have to drop 2 bombs with different timings so we can bomb the switch, get on the platform, switch goes off, platform moves, bomb the switch. But, you know, you can see where that's going. But then there's also rooms like this where you have to dodge that spiked ball that moves up and down through the platforms, and I really struggled to tell where it was in relation to Alundra. Ah well, can't win them all. I'll give them credit for the jumping across switches puzzles in this bit. There's no nonsense here really. The perspective is fine, there's nothing moving. There's just Alundra and some switches that sync when you jump on them. Not a bad little challenge, and certainly a lot more fun than a lot of the previous platforming sections. This arrow puzzle was fine, I'm just bad at timing things, so turning all the switches one colour took far too long. After finally snuffing all the braziers, it's time to face Melzas. So let's begin. Melzas has no intention of fighting fair, so he throws his final underling at us. The Dark Dragon. But unlike Wilder, this one actually flies. A pretty simple fight, but a long fight. The Dark Dragon takes 75 hits to put out of its misery. Its attacks are all decently telegraphed and can be dodged fairly easily, but this attack where it flies high in the air and then dive bombs took me some time to figure out. Because honestly I kept forgetting you could hold triangle to dash. As you can see, I'm using a lot of charge attacks here, so the dragon is technically taking 2 hits every time I hit it, but it spends a lot of time in the air, so this is a long fight regardless. I misplayed a lot in my first attempt at these fights, but I limped through with a decent chunk of my healing expended. Oops. After the dragon dies, we get a scene with the Inoans back in the sanctuary. They all hear Alundra's voice, which is strange because he hasn't spoken a word all game, and decide to send him their prayers one final time. This actually manifests as a full heal and a life vessel. That's definitely a localization goof, because what we're actually given is a wonder essence, which revives us with full health should we kick the bucket. We're finally fighting Melzas himself, and this is one of the hardest fights in the game, or one of the easiest in the game, depending on how quickly you pick up on the gimmick. As you can see, I didn't do that very quickly, and proceeded to get absolutely blasted by his orb cannon thing and various other attacks. Melzas in this phase has 2 very counterable attacks. He's either going to spawn 3 of him in the north, or 4 of him around the centre of the room. Whichever image appears last is the real Melzas, and if you hit that before any attacks go off, he just doesn't attack. So this fight, for me, went from a struggle to survive to being completely unfailable after a couple of minutes. It just turns into this big game of Melzas whack-a-mole. After 68 hits, this form dies, and he transforms into what I can only describe as the Wish version of Andros from Star Fox. This form absolutely destroyed me. There's a bit too much going on and a struggle to keep track of everything. Add to that, things like the hands doing 15 damage, even though I have all of the defensive upgrades possible, and yep, I died. But I was undeterred. I was at the end of the game. I'd made it through some pretty bullshit things, and it was time for me to commit my own bullshit tactics on Melzandros here. I refought through the first 2 bosses, and as the hands and eyes appeared, equipped the fire book, walked north, and did this. And that's how I beat the final boss of Alundra. As a final task, Lars tells us to burn what remains of Melzas, because I hadn't just used fire on him enough. So we burn him with the fire wand as well. We leave the sanctuary as it begins to collapse and the ending starts to play. Also, hold on, I've seen a lot of this ending in the intro of the game. It turns out Working Designs didn't think the intro cutscene in the original release was good enough, so they chopped up parts of the ending and added them in amongst the gameplay videos. Smooth. The Cliff Notes version of the ending is that Inoa will rebuild and live free. Alundra has horrible amounts of PTSD after his adventures and failure to save pretty much everyone he cares about, and Maya buggers off on her own adventure, leaving Alundra behind. So did I enjoy Alundra? Yes, I did. It's got some archaic design choices, but playing it definitely brought back those childhood memories I had of the game, and it's been very, very fun to finally see past Lars's crypt. While yes, I did almost throw the controller on anger in more than one occasion, I can't deny there's a definite charm here. And really, that's what the channel's about. Those nostalgic games that, even with the flaws and all, I can't help but love. If you've made it all the way through the video, please subscribe, it really would mean a lot. And pop down to the comments and let me know if you've played Alundra or if my video has completely put you off. This has been a very fun video to make, and I'll see you in the next one.